The throne room was designed to make people feel small. Wren knew this because she'd scrubbed its floors for 3 years, polishing marble until her reflection stared back at her like a ghost. She knew every crack in the stone walls, every torch bracket, every step leading up to the massive black throne where the Lycan king dispensed justice. She'd never expected to stand before it as an accused criminal. The charge is theft. Lord Ashworth's voice echoed through the chamber, dripping with righteous fury. This servant was discovered with my wife's emerald necklace in her quarters, a piece worth more than she could earn in a lifetime. The nobles gathered along the walls whispered to each other, their eyes crawling over Wren like insects. She could hear the words they weren't quite saying. Thief, criminal, gutter trash who forgot her place. I didn't steal it, Wren said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, swallowed by the vastness of the room. Lady Ashworth gave it to me. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Gave it to you. Lord Ashworth's face purpled with rage. Why would my wife give a priceless family heirloom to a servant girl? Because she was kind, Wren wanted to say. Because she saw me shivering in the corridors last winter and gave me her old coat. Because she taught me to read when no one was looking. Because she told me I deserved better than scrubbing floors until my hands bled. But Lady Ashworth was dead now, buried 3 weeks past, and there was no one left to confirm the truth. She said it was a gift, Wren managed, for my 21st birthday. She said she wanted me to have something beautiful. Lies. Lord Ashworth stepped closer, and Wren forced herself not to flinch. My wife would never waste our family's treasures on a creature like you. You're nothing. Less than nothing. An orphan from the slums who should be grateful we let you sleep in our servants' quarters. The whispers grew louder. Wren could feel the judgment pressing down on her, heavy as stone. No one would believe her. No one ever believed people like her. Your Majesty. Lord Ashworth turned to address the throne, his tone shifting from rage to oily respect. I request the traditional punishment for theft. The girl's hand, removed at the wrist. Let it serve as a warning to other servants who might forget their place. Wren's blood turned to ice. She'd seen that punishment carried out once when she was 12. Had watched a man scream as the blade fell, had nightmares about it for months afterward. She looked at the throne, at the massive figure seated upon it, and felt the last of her hope crumble to dust. The Lycan king was enormous, 7 feet of muscle and barely contained power, with dark hair streaked silver at the temples and a face carved from granite. He'd been watching the proceedings in silence, his amber eyes unreadable, his expression giving nothing away. He was 400 years old. He'd ruled this kingdom since before her grandmother was born. He was the most powerful being in the known world, and he had no reason to care about a servant girl accused of theft. Does anyone speak for the accused? The king's voice was deep and rough, filling the chamber without effort. Silence. Wren looked around at the sea of noble faces, searching for anyone who might show her mercy, but the servants who had been her friends were nowhere to be seen, probably locked away, forbidden from attending, and the nobles looked at her like she was already dead. No one, Your Majesty, Lord Ashworth said with satisfaction. She has no family, no connections, no one of consequence who would vouch for such a creature. I see. The king's amber eyes fixed on Wren, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Then she stands alone, as is fitting for someone of her station. Something shifted in the king's expression, something that looked almost like anger, but not at her. You misunderstand me, Lord Ashworth. The king rose from his throne. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. In 400 years of rule, the Lycan king had never risen during a judgment. He sat, he listened, he dispensed justice from his seat of power. That was how it was done. That was tradition. But he was standing now, descending the steps with slow, deliberate purpose, moving through the crowd of nobles who parted before him like water before a ship. He stopped directly beside Wren. "She stands alone," he said again, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And so I will stand with her." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Ashworth's face had gone pale with shock. The nobles were frozen, staring at their king like he'd lost his mind. Wren couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare up at the ancient predator who had just positioned himself at her side. "Your Majesty," Lord Ashworth stammered, "I don't understand." "No, you don't." The king's voice went cold. "You've brought a theft accusation before my throne with nothing but circumstantial evidence. You've demanded the mutilation of a young woman based on the presence of a necklace that, by your own admission, belonged to your recently deceased wife. She stole it. Or she received it as a gift, exactly as she claims." The king's amber eyes burned with something dangerous. "Your wife was known for her kindness, Lord Ashworth. She founded 3 orphanages. She personally sponsored the education of dozens of servant children. Is it truly so impossible to believe she might have given a birthday gift to a girl who had no one else to celebrate with?" Lord Ashworth's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. There were no witnesses. There are no witnesses to contradict her either." The king turned to face the assembled nobles, and Wren saw them shrink back from his gaze. "What I see before me is a grieving husband who found his wife's jewelry in unexpected hands and assumed the worst. What I do not see is evidence of theft." "She's a servant," Lord Ashworth spat, desperation creeping into his voice. "A nobody from the slums. Why would you take her word over mine?" "Because your word is worth very little." The king's voice dropped to a growl. "I know what you are, Ashworth. I know about the gambling debts, the mistresses, the way your wife's accident happened conveniently after she threatened to leave you." He stepped forward, and Lord Ashworth stumbled backward. "Perhaps this accusation isn't about theft at all. Perhaps it's about ensuring no one inherits evidence of your wife's final wishes." The colour drained from Ashworth's face. "You can't prove—" "I don't need to prove anything. I'm the king." The words were absolute, final. "The accusation is dismissed. The girl keeps the necklace. And you, Lord Ashworth, will submit yourself for questioning regarding the circumstances of your wife's death." Guards materialized from the shadows, moving toward Ashworth with grim purpose. The lord's composure finally cracked. He lunged toward Wren, fury twisting his features. "You little wretch! This is your doing. I'll see you dead for—" The king moved faster than Wren's eyes could track. One moment Ashworth was reaching for her. The next, he was pinned against a pillar with the king's hand around his throat. "Threaten her again," the king said softly, "and I will tear out your spine." Ashworth made a choking sound. The guards took him from the king's grip and dragged him from the chamber, his protests echoing off the marble until the doors closed behind him. And then it was quiet. Wren stood in the center of the throne room, trembling, surrounded by nobles who were staring at her like she'd grown a second head. The king turned to face her, and she realized with sudden terror that she was alone with the most powerful being in the world. "Are you all right?" His voice was different now, softer, almost gentle. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you— I'm nobody. I'm nothing. Why would you stand up for me?" The king studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes holding something she couldn't name. "Because no one should have to stand alone," he said. "Especially not someone who has already lost so much." He offered her his hand. Wren stared at the scarred knuckles, the calloused palm, the impossible reality of a king reaching out to a servant. "Come," he said. "Let me take you somewhere safe." She didn't know why she trusted him, didn't know why her hand moved to meet his, why her fingers curled around his palm like it was the most natural thing in the world. But when the Lycan king led her out of the throne room, she didn't look back. His name was Soren. She learned it from the servants who attended to her new chambers, chambers that were larger than the entire floor of the servants' quarters, where she'd spent the last 3 years. "The king's guest wing," the maid had said, her eyes wide with barely concealed curiosity. "He ordered it prepared for you himself." Wren sat on the edge of a bed, softer than anything she'd ever touched, wearing a nightgown that probably cost more than her annual wages. The emerald necklace hung around her throat. She hadn't been able to bring herself to take it off. It was the only thing she had left of Lady Ashworth, the only proof that someone had once thought she was worth caring about. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lord Ashworth's face, twisted with hatred, saw the blade that had been meant for her wrist, saw the king rising from his throne, breaking 400 years of tradition for a servant girl he'd never met. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. The knock came at dawn. "Come in," she said, expecting a servant with breakfast. Instead, the door opened to reveal the king himself. He looked different in the morning light. Less like a statue, more like a man. He'd exchanged his formal clothes for a simple tunic and trousers, and his dark hair was slightly dishevelled, as if he'd run his hands through it. "You didn't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. "Neither did you." Wren wasn't sure where the observation came from, but there were shadows under his amber eyes, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of a long night. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. "You're observant." "Lady Ashworth taught me to pay attention. She said people reveal themselves in the details." Wren's throat tightened at the memory. "She said it was how she knew I was worth teaching." She was right about that, at least. Soren moved into the room, settling into a chair by the window. He seemed careful to maintain distance, to keep from crowding her. "I looked into her death more thoroughly last night. There's enough evidence to hold Lord Ashworth for trial." "Evidence?" "Letters, financial records, testimony from servants who were too afraid to speak while he held power." His jaw tightened. She was planning to leave him, to divorce him publicly and expose his debts. He couldn't allow that. Wren had suspected, had felt the wrongness of Lady Ashworth's accident in her bones, but hearing it confirmed made grief and rage twist together in her chest. "She deserved better," she whispered. "Yes, she did." Soren's amber eyes held hers. "So do you." "I'm just a servant. I scrub floors. You were a servant. You scrubbed floors." He leaned forward, his expression intent. "But that doesn't define your worth, Wren. It never did." She stared at him. "Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You could have let Lord Ashworth take my hand and never thought of me again." "No." The word came out rough, almost raw. I couldn't have. Why not? Soren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer, more uncertain than she'd heard from him before. Because the moment you walked into my throne room, my wolf started howling your name. Because I've spent 400 years sitting on that throne, dispensing justice without feeling anything. And then you stood there alone and scared, and something inside me woke up. His hands clenched on his knees. Because you're my mate, Wren. And watching someone hurt you would have destroyed me. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible words, ridiculous words, the kind of thing that happened in fairy tales, not to orphan servants who had nothing to offer a king. That can't be right, she heard herself say. I wish it weren't. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're 21 years old. You've been scrubbing floors while I've been ruling kingdoms. You deserve someone your own age, someone who can give you a normal life, not— He gestured at himself. Not an ancient wolf who's been alone so long he's forgotten how to be anything else. But the mate bond doesn't care about that. No, it doesn't. His amber eyes found hers, and she saw the vulnerability he was trying to hide. I'm not telling you this because I expect anything. I'm telling you because you deserve the truth. Because after everything you've been through, you deserve to know why I couldn't let you stand alone. Wren's heart was pounding. She should be afraid, should be running from this man who had just declared himself bound to her by fate, should be remembering that powerful men always wanted something in return. But he wasn't asking for anything. He was sitting in a chair by the window, maintaining careful distance, giving her information instead of demands. What happens now? She asked. Whatever you want. He said it simply, without hesitation. If you want to leave, I'll give you gold, property, ashes, and anything you need to build a life somewhere else. If you want to stay as a guest, you're welcome for as long as you like. If you want— He stopped, took a breath. If you want to explore what this bond could be, I'll wait. However long you need. There's no pressure, no expectation. Just choices. Real ones. You'd let me leave? Even with the mate bond? I'd hate it. He admitted it without flinching. I'd probably spend the rest of my very long life feeling like something was missing. But I won't trap you, Wren. I won't be another person who takes your choices away. She studied him, this ancient king who had broken tradition to stand beside her, who was now offering her freedom she'd never had. He looked tired, lonely, like he'd been carrying weight for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Lady Ashworth used to say that the measure of a person was how they treated people who couldn't help them. Wren said slowly, You didn't know I was your mate when you stepped down from that throne. You just knew I was alone. Yes. So you would have stood with me anyway, even if there was no bond. Yes. He held her gaze. Because no one should have to face that kind of cruelty without someone in their corner. Because I've watched too many innocent people be destroyed by powerful men who thought their wealth made them untouchable. His voice roughened. Because you reminded me of why I became king in the first place. Not for the power. For the chance to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Something cracked open in Wren's chest. Something that had been locked away since Lady Ashworth died, since she'd realized she was truly alone in the world. I don't want to leave, she said quietly. Soren went still. What? I don't want to leave. She stood, crossing the room to stand before him. I don't know what I want yet. I don't know if I can be what a mate is supposed to be. But I know I don't want to go back to scrubbing floors while pretending I don't feel whatever this is. Whatever what is. This. She pressed her hand to her chest, where something warm had been growing since he'd first stood beside her. This feeling like I'm not alone anymore, like someone actually sees me. Soren's breath caught. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached out and took her hand. I see you, he said softly. I've seen you since the moment you walked into my throne room with your head held high and your heart breaking, and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never have to stand alone again. Wren looked at their joined hands, at the king who had risen from his throne for her, at the future stretching out before her, uncertain and terrifying, and full of possibility. Okay, she whispered. Let's figure this out together. Figuring it out, as it turned out, meant learning to take up space. 3 weeks into her new life, Wren still caught herself apologizing for existing. Sorry for sitting in a chair that wasn't meant for servants. Sorry for eating food that was too fine for her station. Sorry for being in the library when nobles came to visit. Soren never corrected her with words. He just looked at her with those amber eyes until she heard herself and stopped. You're doing it again, he said one evening, finding her curled in a corner of the library with a book she'd borrowed without asking. I know. She clutched the book to her chest. Old habits. Would it help if I told you the library is yours now? All of it. Every book, every chair, every corner you want to curl up in. That seems excessive. You're going to be queen someday. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Queens don't apologize for reading. Wren's breath caught. They hadn't discussed the future, not in concrete terms. She'd been too busy learning to believe she deserved the present. Is that what you want? She asked carefully. A queen? Soren settled into the chair across from her, his massive frame somehow looking at home among the dusty shelves and leather-bound volumes. What I want is you. The title is incidental. But you need a queen. For the kingdom. For heirs and alliances and all the things kings are supposed to have. I've survived 400 years without any of that. His amber eyes held hers. What I haven't survived is a single day since meeting you without wanting to be near you. Something warm bloomed in Wren's chest. She'd been trying to ignore it. This feeling that grew stronger every time he looked at her, every time he asked about her day, every time he remembered some small detail she'd mentioned in passing. I don't know how to be what you need, she said quietly. You already are. He leaned forward, his expression intent. You think I need someone who knows politics. I have advisors for that. Someone who can command armies. I have generals. What I need, what I've needed for 400 years and never found, is someone who sees me as more than a crown. Everyone sees you as a king. Exactly. His voice roughened. They see the throne, the power, the centuries of rule. They don't see the man who tends his mother's garden at midnight because it's the only place he can breathe. They don't see the king who sits through endless council meetings and wonders if any of it matters. Wren stared at him. In 3 weeks of living in the castle, of sharing meals and conversations and quiet moments, she'd never heard him sound so raw. You have a garden? She asked. He laughed, surprised, genuine. That's what you take from that confession. I'd like to see it. If that's allowed. Something softened in his expression. It's more than allowed. Come. He led her through corridors she'd never seen, past rooms she'd never known existed, until they emerged into a wild tangle of green hidden behind the castle's east wing. Moonlight silvered the leaves. The scent of night-blooming flowers hung heavy in the air. "My mother planted this," Soren said, his voice quiet. "She died when I was barely a century old. This is all I have left of her." Wren moved through the garden, trailing her fingers over petals and leaves. She could feel him watching her, could sense how much this place meant to him. "Lady Ashworth had a garden," she said. "Not like this, just a small patch behind the kitchens. She let me help her with it sometimes." Her throat tightened. "She said everyone deserved something that grew." "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "She would have liked you too. She always said kings should be judged by how they treated the powerless." Wren turned to face him. "She would have approved of what you did in that throne room." "I did what anyone should have done. But no one else did. That's the point." She stepped closer, close enough to see the silver threads in his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of centuries. "You rose from your throne. You broke 400 years of tradition. You stood beside a servant girl who had nothing to offer you. You offered me everything." His voice dropped low. "You just don't know it yet." "Then tell me." Soren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words came slowly, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. "I've been alone for so long, Wren. Surrounded by people, but alone. Every day the same. Wake up, rule, judge, decide, sleep, repeat. I stopped feeling things centuries ago. Stopped hoping for anything beyond duty." His amber eyes found hers in the moonlight. "And then? You walked into my throne room, and something woke up. Something I'd thought was dead." "What?" "Hope." He said it like a confession. "You gave me hope. Not because of the mate bond. That came after. Because you stood there, terrified and alone, and you didn't break. Because you held your head high while a powerful man tried to destroy you. Because you reminded me that courage isn't about power. It's about standing up, even when you're afraid." Wren's eyes stung. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "May I?" She nodded, and his palm cupped her cheek. His skin was warm, his touch impossibly gentle for a man who could tear someone's spine out with his bare hands. "I don't need you to be brave," he murmured. "I don't need you to be anything other than who you are. I just need you to believe that you're worth standing beside." "I'm trying." Her voice cracked. "I spent my whole life being told I was nothing, that I was lucky to scrub floors, that people like me didn't deserve—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Didn't deserve what?" "This." She gestured between them. "Someone who looks at me like I matter. Someone who asks what I want instead of telling me what to do. Someone who—" The tears spilled over. "Someone who rose from a throne because I was alone." Soren's thumb brushed away her tears. "You'll never be alone again. I swear it." "You can't promise that. You're a king. You have duties, responsibilities, none of which matter more than you." He stepped closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "I've ruled for 4 centuries. I've conquered territories and crushed rebellions and made more decisions than I can count. But you—" His breath shuddered out. "You're the first choice that's ever felt right." Wren didn't know who moved first. Maybe they moved together, drawn by a force older than words. But suddenly his lips were on hers, soft and questioning, asking instead of demanding. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fire and longing, and 400 years of loneliness meeting 21 years of being unseen. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was powerful, like she was something worth breaking centuries of tradition for. When they finally broke apart, Wren was trembling. "I'm falling for you," she whispered. "I know it's fast, and I know I'm just a servant, and I know you're not just anything." Soren's voice was fierce. "You're my mate, my equal, the only person in 400 years who has ever made me want to step down from that throne." "I don't want you to step down. I just want you to stand with me. Always." He pressed his forehead to hers again. "From this moment until my last breath, I will always stand with you." She kissed him again, there in his mother's garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in the dark. And for the first time in her life, Wren didn't feel alone. She felt found. The trial of Lord Ashworth drew every noble in the kingdom to the castle. Wren watched from the gallery above the throne room, the same gallery where servants once stood invisible, waiting to refill goblets and clear plates. But she wasn't invisible anymore. Every eye that swept upward found her, lingered, judged. She could hear the whispers even from here. "The servant girl. Can you believe it? They say the king has taken her as his mate, a floor scrubber. Ashworth was right about one thing. She's nothing. Less than nothing." Wren's hands clenched in her lap. 6 weeks of learning to take up space. And still, the whispers cut like knives. Below, Lord Ashworth stood in chains before the throne. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by his time in the dungeons, stripped of the power that had made him so terrifying. But his eyes, when they found her in the gallery, still held that same poisonous hatred. "The evidence is clear." Soren's voice rang through the chamber. "Lord Ashworth is guilty of the murder of Lady Eleanor Ashworth. The sentence is death." The crowd murmured. Ashworth's face contorted with rage. "This is a farce." He strained against his chains, spittle flying from his lips. "You've condemned me because of her, that gutter rat who bewitched you with her lies." "I've condemned you because you killed your wife." Soren's voice was ice. "The servant girl has nothing to do with it." "She has everything to do with it. She poisoned Eleanor against me, filled her head with ideas about leaving, about independence, about—" Ashworth's laugh was ugly. "Did you know they were planning to run away together? Your precious mate and my wife escaping like thieves in the night?" The whispers became a roar. Wren felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't true. Not entirely. Lady Ashworth had talked about leaving, yes. Had even suggested that Wren come with her to serve in a new household far from Lord Ashworth's cruelty. But they hadn't been running away. They'd been planning a new beginning. "Is this true?" A noble stepped forward, his expression calculating. "Did the servant girl conspire with Lady Ashworth against her husband?" "There was no conspiracy," Wren heard herself say. Her voice carried across the hall, stronger than she'd expected. "Lady Ashworth was planning to divorce her husband legally. She asked me to accompany her as her attendant. That's all." "You admit it, then?" Ashworth's smile was triumphant. "You admit you were involved in my wife's betrayal?" "I admit that your wife wanted to escape a marriage to a man who gambled away her fortune and kept mistresses in her own home." Wren stood, gripping the gallery railing. "I admit that she was kind to me when no one else was. I admit that she deserved better than you." The hall went silent. Wren could feel every noble staring at her. The servant girl who dared to speak at a lord's trial, who dared to defend herself in front of the entire court. "You see?" Ashworth's voice dripped with venom. "You see what she is? A manipulator, a schemer. She seduced my wife's sympathy, and now she's seduced your king. How long before she poisons him against all of you? Enough. Soren rose from his throne, and the hall fell instantly silent. Lord Ashworth, you stand convicted of murder. Your attempt to deflect blame onto an innocent woman changes nothing. Innocent? Ashworth laughed. She's a whore who spread her legs for a crown. Everyone knows it. Everyone sees it. You've just been too blinded by her tricks to… Soren moved. One moment he was on the throne. The next, he was standing before Ashworth with his hand around the man's throat, lifting him off his feet as easily as picking up a child. I warned you once about threatening her. Soren's voice was barely human, more growl than words. I won't warn you again? Kill me then. Ashworth's voice was strangled but defiant. Kill me, and prove what everyone already suspects, that you've lost your mind over a servant girl who isn't worth the dirt under your boots. You're wrong about many things, Ashworth. Soren's grip tightened. But you're most wrong about her. He released Ashworth, letting him crumple to the floor. The guards moved forward to restrain him, but the damage was already done. Wren could feel the mood of the room shifting. Doubt creeping into eyes that had been neutral. Suspicion hardening in faces that had been merely curious. The whispers started again, louder now. Perhaps he has a point. The king has never acted this way before. A servant as queen? It's unprecedented. Wren couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, the judgment pressing down on her like a physical weight. She'd been fooling herself that she could belong here, that she could be more than what she was born to be. She fled. Through the gallery, down the servants' stairs she still remembered, out into the garden that had become her refuge. She didn't stop until she reached the stone bench beneath the roses, where she collapsed with her head in her hands. She should leave, should take whatever gold Soren would give her and disappear before she destroyed him, before her presence cost him his kingdom, his authority, his throne. Wren. She didn't look up, couldn't bear to see disappointment in his eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have spoken. I made everything worse. You defended yourself. His footsteps approached, slow and careful. You stood up to a man who was trying to destroy you. Again. And now the entire court thinks I'm a scheming whore who seduced you for power. The entire court can go to hell. Soren crouched before her, his hands coming up to cup her face. Look at me. She couldn't. I'm not worth this. I'm not worth your kingdom, your reputation, You're worth everything. His voice cracked. Wren, please, look at me. She looked. His amber eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, though she'd never imagined a king could cry. I don't care what they think, he said fiercely. I don't care what they whisper. I have spent 400 years caring about nothing but this kingdom, and it has given me nothing but loneliness and duty and endless, crushing responsibility. You, his voice broke, you give me hope. You give me something to fight for beyond survival. Do you understand? They'll never accept me. Then they'll learn. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Or they'll leave. I won't force you to earn a place you already deserve. You're my mate, Wren. Not because of politics or power or anything they could understand. Because my soul recognized yours the moment you walked into that throne room. I'm a servant. You're a queen. He said it with absolute certainty. You've been a queen since the moment you stood alone before my throne and refused to break. You've been a queen since you held your head high while a powerful man tried to destroy you. The title is just the world catching up to what I already know. Wren's tears spilled over. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. You already are, and you always will be, and I will spend every day of my life proving to you that you belong here. Then claim me. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Make it official. Make it so they can't question it anymore. Soren went still. Are you sure? The claiming bond is permanent. Once I mark you, I'm sure. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong. I want to belong to you, Soren. I want to be yours in a way no one can deny. He made a sound low in his throat, half groan, half growl. And then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, nothing like the gentle exploration they'd shared before. When his lips moved to her neck, when she felt the sharp press of his teeth against her pulse, she didn't flinch. She tilted her head back and let him claim her. The bite was sharp and bright. The bond that followed was warmth spreading through every vein, awareness of him flooding her senses, the absolute certainty that she would never be alone again. Mine, he breathed against her skin. Yours, she agreed, now and forever. They stayed in the garden until the sun set, wrapped in each other, letting the bond settle into their bones. And when they finally returned to the castle, Wren didn't walk behind him like a servant. She walked beside him, like a queen. The coronation was held on the anniversary of the day Soren rose from his throne. Wren had argued against the date, had worried it would remind everyone of how she'd come to the castle, of the scandal and the whispers and the accusations. But Soren had been insistent. It's the day everything changed, he'd said, his amber eyes soft in the morning light. The day I stopped being alone. Why wouldn't we celebrate it? So here she stood, in the same throne room where she'd once scrubbed floors, wearing a gown of deep green silk that matched the emerald necklace at her throat. Lady Ashworth's necklace. She'd never taken it off, not once in the year since that terrible day. The nobles filled the hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Some had accepted her. Others still whispered behind their hands. But none of them could deny the claiming mark on her neck, or the bond that pulsed between her and the king like a second heartbeat. You're trembling, Soren murmured, standing beside her at the base of the throne. I'm terrified. Good. It means you understand the weight of what you're accepting. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. But you don't have to carry it alone. The ceremony began with the traditional words, ancient phrases in a language older than the kingdom itself. Wren had memorized them, had practiced them until they felt natural on her tongue. But when the moment came to speak, she found herself adding something new. I come to this throne not as a noble born to power, she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. I come as a servant who learned that worth is not determined by birth. I come as an orphan who found family in unexpected places. I come as a woman who stood alone. Her voice cracked, just once, and found a king who stood with her. The nobles shifted. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked thoughtful. And a few, a precious few, looked at her with something that might have been respect. I cannot promise to be the queen you expected, Wren continued. I cannot promise to know every protocol, every tradition, every rule of noble society. But I can promise this. I will never forget what it means to have nothing. I will never forget what it means to stand alone. And I will spend every day of my reign ensuring that no one in this kingdom has to face that kind of loneliness. She turned to Soren, who was watching her with an expression that made her heart ache. Because that's what a good king taught me, she said softly. That power means nothing if it doesn't protect the powerless. That tradition means nothing if it allows cruelty to flourish. That the measure of a ruler is not how they treat nobles, but how they treat the people who have no one to speak for them. The hall was utterly silent. Wren could feel the weight of every stare, every judgment, every whispered doubt. And then Soren smiled. "My queen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My mate, my equal in all things." He placed the crown on her head, a delicate circlet of silver and emeralds that had been commissioned just for her. It was lighter than she'd expected. Or maybe she was stronger than she'd known. The nobles bowed. All of them, even the ones who had whispered, even the ones who had doubted. Because whatever they thought of her origins, she was their queen now. And the king had made it clear that anyone who challenged her challenged him. The celebration continued for hours. Wren danced, something she'd learned in the past year, though she still wasn't graceful. She accepted congratulations from nobles who had once looked through her like she was invisible. She smiled until her face ached and talked until her voice was hoarse. But the moment she treasured most came near midnight, when she slipped away to the garden. Soren found her there, as she'd known he would. The bond between them made hiding impossible, not that she wanted to hide from him anymore. "Escaping your own coronation?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her. Taking a moment to breathe. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the tension drain from her body. "It's been a long year." "It has." His arm came around her, pulling her close. "Any regrets?" "About becoming queen? About marrying an ancient wolf who snores?" "I do not snore." "You absolutely snore." She tilted her head up to smile at him. "But no, no regrets. Not a single one." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'm proud of you, you know. That speech, it was exactly what this kingdom needed to hear. It was the truth, that's all. The truth is often the hardest thing to say." His amber eyes found hers in the moonlight. "You've changed so much since that day in the throne room. The woman who stood before me then, she was brave, but she didn't know it. She was extraordinary, but she didn't believe it. And now? Now you believe it. That's the difference." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You finally see yourself the way I've always seen you?" Wren's eyes stung. A year ago, she would have argued, would have listed all the reasons she wasn't worthy, wasn't enough, wasn't deserving of any of this. But she'd spent a year learning to take up space, a year learning to believe she belonged, a year with a man who rose from his throne for her and never stopped standing by her side. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said it enough. I love you, Soren, for seeing me when I was invisible, for standing with me when I was alone, for believing I could be more than what I was born to be. You were always more." His voice was rough with emotion. "You just needed someone to remind you." They stayed in the garden until the stars began to fade, wrapped in each other, listening to the distant sounds of celebration. And when they finally returned to the castle, they returned together, king and queen, mates, partners in everything. 3 years later, Wren stood in the same garden with a daughter in her arms. The child had her father's amber eyes and her mother's dark hair. She was barely 2 years old, but already she commanded the attention of everyone around her. Curious, fearless, utterly certain of her place in the world. "She's going to be trouble," Soren said, settling onto the bench beside them. "I can tell already." "She's going to be extraordinary." Wren pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "She's going to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she belongs, knowing she never has to stand alone." "Because of you." Soren's hand came up to cup her face. "Because you taught this kingdom what it means to see people, to value them for who they are, not where they came from." Wren thought about the girl she'd been, the servant who'd scrubbed floors and learned to be invisible, the orphan who'd believed she was nothing, less than nothing, not worth the space she occupied. That girl was gone now, not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed, healed, made whole by a king who had looked at her lowest moment and seen not a burden to be pitied, but a treasure to be claimed. "I was so afraid," she said softly. "That day in the throne room. I was so sure I was going to lose everything. And instead I gained everything." She leaned into his warmth, watching their daughter grab at flower petals with determined fingers. "A home, a family, a place where I belong." "You always belonged." Soren pressed his forehead to hers. "The world just took too long to see it." She kissed him, soft and sweet, and full of promise, and when their daughter squealed with impatience, demanding attention, they both laughed and turned their focus to her. The throne room had been designed to make people feel small, but Wren had learned that size had nothing to do with worth, that the smallest person could change everything, that the poorest girl could become a queen. All it took was one person willing to stand with her, and she had found that person. Against all odds, against all expectations, against everything she'd been taught to believe about herself. She had found him, and he had found her. And neither of them would ever have to stand alone again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale of fated mates, fierce kings, and the women who capture their hearts. Until next time.